Right, okay, we're just over time, so I think we'll make a start. So thank you for coming to this afternoon session. We are joined by Dr. Claire Weisenberg, and she will be talking about the Kitchener Camp Project. Claire is the designer and editor of the Kitchener Camp Project, an independent online collaborative research endeavour, and of Leave to Land, a mobile exhibition that outlines the history of the Kitchener Camp Rescue using images sent in by families to the project over a 2-year period. Both the project website and the exhibition were donated to the Wiener Holocaust Library in 2019. Over to you, Claire.
So I never know when I'm talking about Kitchener Camp if anyone in the room has ever heard of it before. Usually the answer is no, despite my best efforts. So I'll give you a little bit of context for it. I can't go too much into the history because I want to talk about the move towards VR, but you'll get some of the history as we go along. Just make sure my pointer's on visible. Yeah. So the immediate context for the Kitchener Camp Rescue were the events of November 1939, generally known as Kristallnacht or the November pogroms. I think among the British public there's a general understanding of the fact that synagogues were set alight. There's a painting there by a Kitchener refugee of those events. People know that shop windows were smashed. They know that homes were raided. I think there's much less knowledge of the fact that at the same time, around 30,000 German Jewish men were rounded up, arrested, and sent to one of 3 German concentration camps, mostly to either Dachau, Buchenwald, or Sachsenhausen. At the time, the Nazi government wanted Jews to leave Germany, so the agreement was if they paid a fine and they agreed to leave the country within 2 weeks, they could get released from the camps. So that's the immediate context for this. In Britain, meanwhile, tens of thousands of Jews had been rescued from Germany over the course of the 1930s. As far as I've been able to tell from my own research, it's about 72,000. About 65,000 were rescued with the financial and organisational assistance of an aid agency. It's a bit more complicated than this, there were more people involved, but the short version is an aid agency known as the Central British Fund for German Jewry. Earlier in the 30s, it was mostly families and individuals who came out, people with the financial wherewithal to pay for visas, who had maybe relatives here who would provide guarantees. Academics helped rescue academics, medics helped rescue medics. Around 20,000, mostly women, were brought out on what were known as domestic service visas, some men as well. And some were brought out on agricultural and industrial training schemes. They were a continuation of similar schemes that had run in Germany throughout the 1930s. Around 27,000 young German Jews had been trained in those schemes, again, largely funded by the same bodies that funded the Kitchener Rescue, in skills to aid migration, practical skills. So you get November 39, 30,000 German Jewish men arrested and put in concentration camps. Up till now, although Nazi Germany wanted Jews to leave, as you probably know, nobody wanted to increase their visa quota. However, with those events in 1938, they were very well publicised in the British press. There was a change of feeling in Britain, and the aid agencies managed to persuade the German government to release 2 group visas. One is really pretty well known in Britain, I think, the so-called Kindertransport, the rescue of 10,000 unaccompanied children. About 7,500 of them were Jewish, and really not known at all, the Kitchener Camp Rescue, of around, in the end, between 3,500, we think, and 4,000 German Jewish men to a little corner of Kent in Britain. So, 1939, where do we put a big group of male refugees? There was I've put a plan here that you can have a look at some point. There was an ex-World War I army training camp. There were several of them actually. There were originally 7 in the Richborough area. They were all named after First World War generals, which often causes confusion when we're trying to talk about Kitchener Camp in the context of World War II and refugees, because the kind of common perception of Kitchener is World War I and concentration camps elsewhere. But these were kind of derelict sites. The camps were in a really bad state, but these architects came in and went, well, we could get the refugees to renovate them and use them to house groups of refugees. So that's what we had going on here. When I started looking into Kitchener Camp in 2015-16, there really was nothing about it. You could Google it and it just came up blank. It was tumbleweed. And to cut a long story short about how we got the first project going, I put the word out to global institutions where I knew there were refugee families and through genealogy sites and so on, 2 refugee families, and said, look, the records were either destroyed during the war or after the war in some cases. They were scattered, they've been lost. There's really nothing tangible except scattered in archives. Most of the administrative records are gone. So I said, look, I know what it's like as refugee families. We mostly have a photograph at least. Maybe you've got one photograph of your dad and your grandfather in Kitchener Camp. Maybe you've got one letter from a family back in Germany. Maybe you've got a document that they used or a passport or something. If we collect all these items together, one letter, one document, one photograph at a time, we can rebuild this forgotten, lost history. So that's what the Kitchener Camp project was all about. And the photographs of items that you'll see coming up on these slides are all things that were sent in by families. It was a tremendous response. The last 6 months of the project ended in 2019. I somehow managed to cobble together a travelling exhibition. It's a 10-panel exhibition, and that got donated with the website to the Vienna Holocaust Library. It's apparently the most borrowed exhibition. It goes all over the country to schools and community centres. There's a copy at Leo Beck in New York. There's a copy that tours around California. We're hoping to get one into the Sydney Holocaust Museum. Fingers crossed, somebody's working hard on that. So where was the camp? I don't know what the geography's like in the southeast corner of England, but Canterbury, pretty well known, Dover, Sandbridge there, the blue one. The camp's about half a mile up the road from Sandbridge. Shot taken, aerial shot from 2024. That's the small town of Sandbridge in 1939. There was a population of about 3,500. And if you go through a little toll gate, over a little bridge, the organisers of the camp managed to get waived the toll, otherwise it would have bankrupted them in weeks. Up the Ramsgate Road, Kitchener Camp was here. Hague Camp, which was another of those 7 World War I camps, was on the right. The idea was to renovate Hague as well, but war started in September 39 and that never really got started. So we've got this bank of visual sources and record sources that I'll talk about next. So in terms of building an ER model, I feel we've got a huge amount of material to work with. Visual resources first. Google Earth Pro, bless it, going back to 1940, that same shot we saw earlier. Sandwich in the south before its post-war expansion, and Kitchener Camp and Hague. And if you can see, you start to see the outline of the huts that were the residences and the administrative buildings for the refugees. That's a close-up. It's an aerial shot that's been spliced together, but the road goes straight through with Kitchener on the left. You're really getting a sense of the huts now, that you can see on the plan. Hague on the right. I know you can't see the detail of the plan on the screen really, which is why I brought the original. If you've not had time to have a look at the architectural plan, it's there. I've just highlighted a couple of the key areas I'm going to talk about. The dining hall, the luggage store, and the hospitals. The hospitals were well used when refugees first arrived, particularly. They were supposed to have undergone health checks and not have any communicable diseases and things, but some arrived in a very poor state if they were arriving sort of hot on the heels of having got out of the concentration camp. I'm going to look particularly at the dining hall. How do you feed 4,000 in a camp that's just been set up, and the luggage store as we go through? There's nothing left of the camp. I don't know if I've already mentioned that. Post-war, Pfizer bought the site and levelled it. It's an industrial park. So there's nowhere families can go to see what this place looks like or touch the buildings they were in or any of that. So one of the first things I did in the first project, and that I want to kind of extend now with a virtual model, is to try and recreate a sense of what the camp was like, because only if we understand the physicality of the camp can we really understand the experience of the refugees that were there. So I took the architectural plan and I took the aerial shots, and at a very basic level in those early days started to label up what it is that we're looking at. We started to get some photographs in from families that give us more detail. There's the main gates. I've no idea how they took this shot in 1939. We've got several of these. My best guess, and it's probably rubbish, but there's a water tower there. Most of us thought there was one water tower because it keeps appearing in photographs. There's actually two, as we could see as more items came in. The other one's here, so whether someone climbed a water tower, I don't know, because this landscape is incredibly flat, but somehow they got these great images. Whoops. Tent there was loaned by the Jewish Lads Brigade. It was used as a synagogue. So we start to flesh out the camp, how it looked. When the refugees arrived, this is what the architects who drew up this plan found. Really overgrown, broken windows, holes in the roofs, incredibly muddy. There's several accounts in diaries of delivery lorries getting stuck in the mud, so sorting out the roads was a priority. A couple of nice before and after figures. That's for a family, in fact, one on the right is from the Being Holocaust Library. That's one of the concerts. The concert hall was across the road in Hay. Gaz was a cinema that was built. This was a refugee camp. It wasn't an internment camp. Internment came much later in the summer 1940. We know what the exterior of the camp looks like. So if we want to enter the virtual reality model from the exterior, we've got a really good idea of what it looks like from various sources. There was a Kitchener Camp Review magazine that was published each month. There are lots of sketches in there. You can see the, where are we? Yeah, this shaping on the gate. We've got a very good idea of what the entrance to the camp's like. Imagine going in, it's very centrally located, the main gate, as you can see on the architectural plan. You see the type of fencing here, and it appears on the sketch. I come back to it wasn't an internment camp. The guards on the gates were Jewish refugees. They weren't at this stage at least soldiers or police. We've got lots of documentation to say, you know, in that Zalman day guard for 6.5 months, it was guarded by refugees. And that's important because a lot of people, families, and indeed some of the refugees themselves referred to it as an internment camp, but it wasn't. The feature of the water tower I mentioned, you can see a nice sketch of it there. That's in the Kitchener Camp Review. The photo below was another magazine publication that we can draw on for resources for a model. It was called Some Victims of the Nazi Terror. It was ironically named because it's full of kind of stripped down beefy guys doing physical work or relaxing in the sun or whatever. So it was this one ironic title, Some Victims. It was basically saying they're really not victims. This photograph, all the families had moments like this during the project. This photograph I've known all my life. That's my dad, so that's my interest in the camp. I was able to work out as more materials came in, and we did this across lots of family photos. Turns out it's taken exactly there. We can locate it with the water tower and the huts. So some interesting personal items. Kitchener kitchens. Gradually we're able to start building up an idea of how they fed 4,000 people 3 times a day. There are again sketches of some of the instruments. You can see this huge stock pot and label here. This guy here was the chief cook, we found out. He's a guy called Jack Agan. He was the cook for the Jewish Lads Brigade, so he had lots of experience for summer camps and cooking for kids under campus. He was now dealing with 4,000 men. We know now that this was a room called the White Dining Hall, so if we want to create that within the model, we've got a very good idea of what it looks like. The men were fed in 2 shifts. to get through everybody. So that's sort of kitchens, dining halls. There are lots of other facilities. 4,000 is a small town. There was a post office that was incredibly busy, letters coming and going from Germany and Austria to the camp, also to consulates and embassies trying to get visas, trying to get children out, trying to get wives out, trying to get parents out. We got huge numbers of letters, correspondence. In the centre there, as well as working in the camp to renovate it and then to run this small town, the men had to have 2 language lessons a week. They had to have 2 English lessons a week. There was Portuguese and Spanish available for people that were hoping to get to South America. 87 local teachers volunteered to come and teach the refugees English. We know what at least one of the hospital buildings looks like. In that little white circle is a cross when you see it close up, so we know that's a hospital building. We know what some of the stalls look like on the camp. This was one of my favourite sets of photos that came in. Most meaningful to me was the luggage stalls. Among the British public, as I say, there's some understanding of a kind of a mythologised history of kinder transport, and it involves a child with a luggage label and a small suitcase, very like the images of the evacuee children in Britain. Kitchener camp's different. These were adult men leaving for the rest of their lives and having their families join them. There were all sorts of restrictions from Nazi Germany on what they could bring out. They could wear a wedding ring, but mostly valuables were banned. They could have bizarre sort of detail. 1 set of silver cutlery per person who was leaving, but no more. They couldn't bring a set. They couldn't bring money out. They could bring 10 marks, that was it. They arrived with 10 marks and empty lot. The Kitchener camp organisers gave them a very small amount of pocket money, and British school children raised money to give them some more, but no money. There was also a kit list, quite a long kit list that we've got copies of things they had to bring to the camp that the organisers said you have to bring with you. They had to bring towels, they had to bring pillows, they had to bring work clothes, they had to bring rubber boots for working in, they had to bring sports kit, they were asked to bring musical instruments if they could. And the solidity of those items in the wooden crates and the trunks, of bringing out everything you could to start a new life. I just think there's for me, more incredibly powerful images. I still have my dad's trunk. Going back to the architectural plan then, what was life like for the refugees living in the camp? And that's something I want to reflect in a model. I want to get a sense of how they experienced these months. These are the residential huts. They're all numbered, so that's hut 23, and each one was divided in half with sort of white fabric, as we can see on some of the photographs that came in. They're numbered with Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, so when you see the envelopes of letters from family in Germany, you'll get, Werner Weissenberg, hut 23, 1, Kitchener camp, Sandwich, Kent. In each hut, we know from diaries and from interviews after the war, like this one, an interview with the foreman of the carpenters, a guy called Walter Brill. He said, for every hut we finished, another 72 could come out of concentration camps, come into Kitchener camp and be free. So we know from those kinds of accounts that they're putting 72 men per hut. We know what the outside of the huts look like. We're trying to build a model. This is the numbering of the huts, and that's the Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2. There was a photography competition that ran in the summer, and we think we've got lots of these group photographs. We think they were hut groups, and they show us how the doors were constructed, what the walls were constructed of, and so on. Oh, on the next couple of slides, these little rectangles, diary entry. Phineas May was one of 2 British Jewish brothers, great name. There was Phineas May and Jonas May, who were the directors of the camp. They had been involved again with Jewish Lads Brigade, so very used to helping out with boys living under canvas, no experience whatsoever that prepared them for dealing with 4,000 traumatised men. In his diary, which is on the website, the original is with the Vienna Holocaust Library, he's fascinated by the concerts that they put on and the theatre performances and the arrival of goods, and just almost by the by, periodically, he'll say, 40 refugees arrived from Berlin. So I've just put those in to give you some context for as the refugees are coming into the camp, because that's something I want to reflect in the model as changes over time. What does it look like with 72 men in a hut? Well, top right, I think you've got probably the propaganda version. Very tidy, very neat, a little bit less so. And then this is what it starts to look like, with 72 refugees in a hut. There's no privacy, clearly. Trying to find a quiet moment was impossible. I love this photograph of Herbert Moschheim. He's wearing a hat and scarf, very necessary in the winter months. The huts were single skin walls, single glazed windows, tin roofs. Despite all the renovation work the refugees did, they often leaked in winter, sometimes leaked snow. So it was basic, to say the least. This guy's Walter Brill in the hut. He's the chief carpenter that we've got interviews with. So we know what the inside of huts look like. We can create something of that sense of probably claustrophobia with 72 refugees in a hut. You can see here some attempt to decorate the hut, and there was a mix. There was paintings by the refugees themselves. That's the toll gate I mentioned, coming out of Sandwich. You go through there, over the bridge, half a mile up the road, and that's where the camp was. So that's clearly painted. That's a very recognisable house, still in Sandwich today. These are probably done by the administrators. This is kind of a kitchen camp room with a working man carrying bits of wood and hammering things. And you are not an Englishman, but do your duty here. Very 1930s, very 1940s kind of thing. And again, 8th of April, and assigned in the diary entry, another 130 refugees arrived from Vienna. The men had to work 5 days a week to help rebuild the camp and then to maintain it. The organisers were very conscious of the fact that these were men that had undergone massive trauma in the concentration camps. They'd all been tortured, they'd been starved, they'd been frozen. Hundreds of their compatriots had died over the winter of 38-39 in Dachau, Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen. They also had, many of them had children who they hadn't managed to get out yet. They had wives, they had parents, extended families. So they put on a lot of recreation as much as they could to fill the time, take minds off it, sort of help mental health really. So some of that reflected in these images, the concerts, the sports, etc. Hope you can see it, that ticket that goes across sort of diagonally, Kitchener Camp Cinema. One of the American families sent that through. Just extraordinary items that came in. You can always sort of feel it, the sort of thin card paper that's printed on. That came about because there was a little cinema in Sandwich owned by a guy called Oscar Deutsch. And Oscar Deutsch went on to found the Odeon cinema chain, which you probably know. O-D-E-O-N. Oscar Deutsch entertains our nation. And he originally, when the refugees started arriving, said to the organisers, Phineas and Janus, look, let the refugees come in for free. We're not going to charge them, just let them come and see a film. And over the ensuing months, he set up a 400-seat cinema. Just an extraordinary set of things that went on here. And the last of the visual items, Kitchener Camp may be unknown now, but it was really well known across the country at the time it was running. Loads of newspaper articles about it. They had concerts in the camp. They had Kitchener Camp refugees going up and down the Kent coast doing vaudeville and classical music. And there was a Kitchener Camp flute through an event. I would love to see that reflected in a model. The materials, there's a bunk bed on top of the flute to represent their huts. And it says our thanks to England on the side. I'd love to know if that's something we could recreate within a model. So that's just a taste of the visual resources that we've got. Record sources, it's important to me that the model should have records within it, that we can look at some of the things they needed to get out of Germany, or some of the things they needed, the ID cards they needed here, and so on. So what have we got by way of record sources? Well, quite a lot. First off, Home Office. We've got the Aliens Department Interning Index, known as HA396. This index gives records of aliens in the country Obviously, way beyond Kitchener Camp, but includes Kitchener Camp. That's at the National Archives at Kew, also available on the big genealogy sites like Find My Past and Ancestry. The 1939 register, this was a crucial document for the first project. We didn't know who was in the camp. When I started the project, I was literally adding one name at a time to a list as people got in touch. Then this was released on the genealogy sites. It's like, wow, 3,500 names. So it's the census, the wartime census. Again, the original at Kew, and again, accessible online through the genealogy websites. And that's the information you get for Kitchener Camp. You know what your average census looks like. You know, the records are like, you've got your householder, usually male, wife, children, household staff. Very straightforward for 1939. For Kitchener Camp, you've got Jonas May, Phineas May, and kind of 3,500 German Jewish names. It's an amazing document, and that's what you have on there. From that 39 register, we did a bit of data crunching in all sorts of ways. Very short video to follow of a little bit of that. You're going to see 3,500 tiny spots. Each spot carries the data from the 39 register of one refugee as they leave Berlin and Vienna and arrive over these months in Sandwich, the Kitchener Camp. So I'll explain what you're seeing. Here we go. They start to arrive from the two stations. 3,500 refugees, February 39. This rate of arrival that you're seeing is accurate according to the data we've received for the project. They came mostly out of Berlin and Vienna, some started in Cologne. We've got all kinds of documents that were sent in with the routes, detailed routes, what they did with luggage and so on. This is now May and June. The camp's filling up. This is one of its key arrival times. So coming out Berlin, Vienna, about 2/3 are from Germany, about a third from Austria, some from Sudetenland, a handful from Poland, but mostly it's Germany and occupied Austria. There we go. August 39, the last train is coming out on the 31st of August and arriving early September. And we went on to look at other aspects of what you could do with the data. Some of the St. Louis refugees ended up at Kitchener Camp. About 600 on our count had transmigrated on to the United States. They were all supposed to migrate onwards. They weren't supposed to stay as a condition of the visas from the British government. So we went on to look at other things with that, but don't have time to go into it at the moment. But the data moving with the refugees, I think, is quite a powerful thing to think about. Autumn 39, war starts, and all the aliens living in the country undergo a tribunal, including at Kitchener Camp. There are three categories, A, B, and C. A is enemy, C is friendly, and B is something in the middle. All but two of the refugees at Kitchener Camp get friendly alien status. They're allowed to stay in the camp at this point. They're allowed to also enlist, which 887 did. They enlisted in the British Army. The tribunal cards look like this. They're again at Kew, the National Archives, and they're again with genealogy websites. That's the kind of information you get on the tribunal cards. We've got transmigration records, as I say. I know of over 600 that successfully transmigrated. You get the passenger lists at Kew. You've also got those online on the genealogy sites. That's very unusual, that one, 1944. Very few people moving across to the States by 1944. So you can see there are 22 alien passengers listed, one of them being a Kitchener refugee. The aid agency that funded and organised the kinder transport, the domestic service visas for women and the Kitchener Camp Rescue is now known as World Jewish Relief. It was the CBF. That's the kind of information you get on their registration cards when the refugees landed. And I've lost my point. It was a little bit. There's also, if you're fortunate, they were told to destroy all these records post-war. Fortunately for us, not all of them, many were destroyed, but some still remain. If you're fortunate as a family member, you get these green forms. Some of them go on for pages of the assistance that they were given throughout the war, and even post-war in the case of children. And other record sources, that we've got for Kitchener Camp. we've had everybody that we contacted for the first project was incredibly helpful about sharing resources. And I think the sense I get now for building a VR model using the visual and the record sources that we've got is that they will continue to be helpful. I'd be so much happier if I could get my point of view. So, when I had the idea for a VR model, what I know about VR, you can write in the back of a, I think they look nice. I don't know anything about them. I know nothing about the tech. I built a website for Kitchener that's about as complicated as it gets. I had a chat with a few people that know something about it, and they said, the designers use Miro boards. I said, okay, I'll learn how to use Miro boards, and that was quite straightforward. I'm not going to try and log into it live, because I've seen that thing go wrong on talks before, but I've done some screenshots. Come on, I've lost the pointer. How can I find the magic pointer? Still hasn't come back. But for me, everything starts with this architectural plan. When I had the hackathon yesterday with all these people who do know what they're talking about, they gave me so many other ways of looking at this, and obviously in 12 hours I couldn't rewrite anything, so we're going with what I had. For me, everything starts with this extraordinary architectural plan drawn up by refugee Walter Miro. So, don't try and squint, I'm going to go into these in depth in a minute on different screens, but here, one of the first questions, who is the player or the viewer? There's a visitor book of what Phineas May referred to as the bigwigs, the important people that came to visit the camp, and it became quite fashionable to have visited Kitchener Camp, the Archbishop of Canterbury and various MPs and that. So we could have, a choice maybe of figures from the visitor book as the player. It could be a local Sandwich resident. Hundreds of them came to tour the camps and to see concerts. It could be a refugee. I think there's a lot of options there. So the first of those boxes, it was clearly an issue that for the hackathon people, who's your audience? Now, I thought I knew until I talked to the experts, but maybe I don't. I assume it's a similar audience to the first project, but that we'd hope to expand with a VR model. So German-speaking Jewish refugee families, we've got people who already know about us in the UK, America, Israel, various European countries, Canada, Australia, the places where people were interned and sent overseas or where people have just dispersed since. The Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Centre talked to me after the first project. Materials had been gathered, said they'd been into schools and said to schools, what topic do you want any materials on for the curriculum? They were given a choice, and they also Kitchener Camp, so Bethany at Sir Martin Gilbert has produced this extraordinary 60-page document for schools. It's now in the curriculum for schools. Many schools borrowed the exhibition, and my kind of feeling is that a model would complement the teaching materials and the exhibition itself. It also gets borrowed by Holocaust and other Holocaust institutions, synagogues, church halls, local history societies. So I would hope this would have quite a lot of interest. I was starting to think about the style, the references, the inspiration. Those top boards there are extracts from the travelling exhibition. And we took the colours for that and the fonts for that from the materials that families sent us. So the style and look of the 1930s, 40s, it seems an obvious thing to go with. The colours of the exhibitions, so that the two things could work in parallel. Where once we walked, pre-internet, this was a book like this, that basically simply, it has no narrative really, it's just pages and pages and pages of the names of cities, big towns, small towns, villages, one cow kind of village, wherever there was a Jewish community before the Holocaust. And this image of where once we walked, I think is incredibly important for survivor and refugee families, and it's a very powerful one. So many of us go back. We go to visit Germany, Poland, further afield. There's no grave to visit for family that was killed in the Holocaust, so we go and see perhaps the road where there may have been a house, which may itself not be there anymore. It may well have been bombed down. But we go back, we perhaps run a hand down a wall where a child family member may have run their hand down the wall on the way to school. We touch a doorway, we find what we can. And for Kitchener, again, we encounter absence. So to create something that enables us to, as near as we can, touch that base, I think is very powerful, very important part of how I see this. And finally, in those terms, I'm quite fascinated by the move within architecture to create 3D models, and some are now moving into VR for the high-end architectural models. Real estate agents, apparently, real estate agents are also turning to VR. So there's a lovely article in Miro, which is the journal for British architects, on one guy who's using a CAD model and gradually moving it through stages till he gets to VR. That's a summary of the points he's making in that article. So CAD to photogrammetry to 3D model. I had quite a good chat with Waitman Bourne. I don't know if any of you have encountered his work. He's creating the Oscar concentration camp in a 3D model as a sort of fly-through model. He was very kind, gave me a lot of time on that. But that takes us to the 3D stage, and then moving it through to this architect is using Unreal Engine to move it into VR. So those are the kinds of references, points of reference, inspiration so far. The little yellow post-it. That's where I've got absolutely nowhere with. How is this costed to create it? I have no idea. Everybody is really kind of, we're not talking about that more, very English, we don't talk about money. And I'm still no further on with that. I've got a couple of conversations lined up for after this event. Maybe I'll get somewhere with that. And it's all going to come down to cash. I've put two possible options here. Many more were suggested to me in the hackathon, but I'm going with what I've done for now. If you're in a museum or an institution, you have a very short time with a VR headset because there's somebody else waiting to use the set. So using as a model probably the oldest of these that most of us are familiar with, the Meta and Frank House model, where you can hear a short history if you need the history. You've maybe got a 3 to 5 minute journey across the camp. Maybe you can access 2 buildings. You can listen to a short extract of interviews. You can maybe some postcards and photographs and a taste of it. The second option I'm going to talk about is something I am concerned about, to experience the model of the camp as the refugees experienced it, moving across a timeline from February 39 through to September 39. As I say, it doesn't shut in September 39, but it becomes something different, and there isn't time to go into that. So that the player or the viewer would move through the changing seasons, the changing nature of the camp from derelict to a functioning small town. Here we can explore much more of the camp, we can listen to the interviews that are available. Can we take some of the photographs for the photography competition? Can we read more of the diary extracts? Can we see the kit list and some of the items that refugees brought with them to that kit list? Can we help paint, almost to paint by numbers, those pictures on the walls? Can we meet key characters through their materials? And this I'm happy to talk about in Q&A. I won't say more about now. But meeting characters through the materials. I'll come on to the bit on the right in more detail and more focus at the moment, but carrying on with the things I put onto the Miro board. We've got accounts that gives a lot of detail that have been mirrored in the model. There's a lovely one here of how it felt, in a sense, in February 39, out of this chaos of old boilers, rubbish dumps, partly distempered walls, ladders, wet green paint, the debris resulting from 200 mattresses being delivered and 2,000 blankets and things like this. So we have really detailed accounts for how this could look if we move through the months. So I tried to work it through. How are these things created from what little I can understand about it so far? If we take the first month, February 39, we establish the scene, we go through a series of journey steps to a conclusion as we move to March. So that's what we've got. Opening of the gates, going up the road, viewing derelict buildings and some documents. Let's take those one at a time. The plan here, the centralised gate, everything starts with the plan for me. You open these gates, you enter the camp. It's a winter morning, it's February 39, I want to see that kind of thing reflected in it. You can hear birdsong. We know that, I'm not making it up, it's not poetic license, we know this from diary extracts and letters. You go up this road that's really, really bogged down. You can hear the crunch of ice underfoot, maybe the sort of exterior puddles splash. Can you hear voices narrating an event, perhaps from a diary, perhaps you're planning what you're going to see on the walk. There's a lovely little diary extract there at the bottom, encapsulating the feel of the place in February 39 when they first go in, and it's in such a dilapidated state. The perfect concentration camp on Dartmoor, that's how it's described. And the residents, the refugees themselves, described it, half jokingly, as Anglo-Saxon housing. Journey step, we enter one of the derelict buildings. There's a hole in the roof, there's broken windows, there's maybe an empty table at one end, all things that we can see in the photographs we've looked at. We hear the echoes of steps in empty buildings. We can hear birds' wings flutter. There's a bird trapped in the roof. And again, we're not making that up, we've got accounts of birds trapped in these derelict buildings. Journey step, on the table perhaps there's a list of the workers arriving in the first tranches of refugees. The 39 register I mentioned, fantastically, is ordered in the order the refugees arrived. We've been able to work that out from the camp numbers. So we could look through that perhaps as a viewer. You can hear the paper being turned. You can hear talk about the first few refugees that were arriving. One unfortunate chap, the first electrician to arrive, was called Adolf. So that generated some conversation, as you can imagine. So the conclusion then, moving into March, there's an incident described quite widely where the Union flag is raised at the gate of the camp. So can you hear the cheer of that? Can you hear discussion of that? And so on. We now have visible, didn't it? Got that back. So moving from Miro boards to general inspiration boards, going into that in more detail again. I've put some photographs up that are absolutely nothing to do with kitchen account. I've put literally some colour into how I'd like to see this model operate. So again, we're back with the architectural plan. You go through the gates, you go up the road, you go into derelict huts. There are diary extracts as a possibility, the list of workers arriving. The Met Office has historical records of weather, so we can get a good sense of what the light's doing, how much rain's falling, what the sun's like at particular times over these months that we're looking at the camp. March, the light's changing. There's some winter bulbs coming through, and again, you can see the refugees talking about this kind of thing in letters home and diaries. Maybe in March we could look at those key buildings to do with feeding the refugees. The dining rooms open in this month, the new kitchen's open in this month. You now mentioned the white dining hall because the tables, we know it was called the white dining hall from a photograph that was sent in by a family and from accounts. So the white hall, they're fed in 2 shifts. We had to put all this information together as derived. Someone again in America sent this odd shift dining ticket they had to get onto their particular dinner time shift. All the time at this stage in the model of the camp, you're hearing the construction of the camp as this derelict space is rebuilt. There might be the sound of broken glass as old panes are pushed out, sounds of hammering, sounds of deliveries. You've got morning light coming into the hut. The diary entry, 127 refugees arrived from Vienna. Do they count to go to the luggage stores first? And we explore that. We've got the photographs to have a look around the luggage stores. Do they go into the Merry Vienna Boys hut, Hut 7-1? We've got documents for Hut 7-1 very specifically. So there are various routes around that. Maybe they drop off their luggage first and explore the hut, or vice versa. I want us to consider the routes through the camp as you're moving around. It's very simple, from hut 7-1, the Mary Vienna boys' hut. It's a straight path down to the luggage store. But I want to know what we see and hear and feel. Some of the refugees we know from letters were encountering friends and family they perhaps hadn't seen for weeks or months. They last saw maybe in Germany or Austria. So a greeting, the sound of the path underfoot. There's some, it was a complicated space. It was a place of rescue, but also a place of trauma, from where the refugees themselves had come from and the places that their families were still stuck. But there are moments of lightness, if you like. Accounts like this, if you go into the director's office, you might read his sort of notes he's writing for the Kitchener Camp Review magazine, or his diary. This one, 25 Czechs expected at 8:30. It was terribly wet and thundery. They finally arrived at 10:30, and on my journey to meet them, I slipped and fall in a puddle and lost my dignity. Can we hear a loud splash? Can we hear a curse as he falls? Things that just take us out of the moment. I think juxtaposing moments of levity with some of the other materials is quite a powerful thing.
Just say we have just over 10 minutes left, so just over 10 minutes if you want to go into Q&A.
That's okay. As I say, we might be able to paint some of the things on the wall, we might be able to meet some of the refugees in the form of their materials. The guy on the right in that bottom picture is Walter Brill, the master carpenter, who was a keen refugee in a sense, and he and his wife had the first Kitchener Camp baby. May 39, the light is changing, the warmth, the look of the place is changing, greening up. Can we view the player being part of the photography competition? Can we look around the camp? Can we choose a good spot? Can we hear the sound of a shutter click and have a photograph at the end of it? August 39, again, the light changes, the temperature changes. They introduce some hen houses, completely inadequate to feeding 4,000 refugees, but they're all the time trying to find ways to train the men in useful skills, the skills that will aid migration. It's no good landing in America with as a judge, because you're not qualified in America. You need, as they refer to, useful skills in order to get a job quickly, to get money for visas, to bring families out, and so on. So the hen house, can you hear the sounds of the pecking, the sound of the feed being thrown? Here, moments of difference, if you like. You could turn down an alley. There's a moment of quiet here. This little group of 4 practicing for a concert. Somewhere perhaps you'd leave quite quickly as a viewer, to leave them their privacy. And then the last slide of the inspiration boards, we get to the last trains out, leaving 31st of August, arriving early September. The light and the weather changing again. We've got a Cook's Continental Railway timetable from August 39. Perhaps the viewer could look for the routes and the trains those last refugees would have come out on. And we've got an account here that really reflects those final changes of the camp as war starts. It's the Jewish New Year. It's celebrated in that big tent I mentioned that the Jewish Lads Brigade lent to the camp. It's hauntingly dark in our camp when the sun has set. Only weeks ago, hundreds of lights glittered and flared comfortingly from hut to hut. Now the gloomy camp at night has become an image of the world's state. There are some 50 huts scattered here, and over 3,000 refugees, the majority men, but some women and children as well, celebrating in a modest, discreet way. We've got a photograph, only one lamp shines feebly down a long table. Victims of peace, we've left slavery and humiliation for liberty, but the anxiety for our beloved ones living in the areas of war eclipses any feeling of relaxation which would have made this year's beginning a little easier than autumn 38. Who can help asking what will become of them? So we are, I think as I demonstrated in the hackathon yesterday, my knowledge of this as yet is slim to nil, but I'm working on it. We've got the visual resources we looked at in the first sort of third of this, the maps, the aerial maps, including the aerial maps from 1940. We've got this incredible architectural plan, so we know exactly how we can move through the camp. We've got this incredible bank of photographs to draw on, and also sketches from the magazines and sketches in some of the refugee diaries. We've got the record sources to be able to show people materials from the camp. We've got the collated data from letters and documents from Kitchener Camp Mark 1. There's the material in the National Archives that we looked at on the general genealogy websites that you can access quite easily, less easily accessed, but they've been very helpful. World Jewish Relief's Archive and the archives of the various Holocaust institutions. Most people have, most of the big institutions have something. The things I know, or like to think I know, of the audience, as the sense of how I wanted to look. I've got a very clear vision of that. I want this to be a very tangible experience for you. We've looked at the inspiration, the references. The need to knows are costs. I have no idea. We all have brilliant ideas, I'm sure, for what we'd like to do. And it all gets curtailed in the end to what we can afford, what we can get funding for. And the tech, I've got a much better idea of what the tech is. I haven't seen anything that's doing what I want to do, but that in itself I think is quite interesting, and that in itself might attract designers who are interested in trying something new. And I think there's a huge capacity. If we get a model, a sort of tangible model of the geography of this space, of how the space is used and encompassed by the refugees, then I think that could be a model for many other camps, many other types of geography which we're so familiar from this era. So, winging in Kitchen Camp towards the art, and I'm very happy to chat or take any questions or whatever.
Thank you very much. We have about 6 minutes or so for any feedback, initial thoughts, questions. I'm looking around to see if anyone's on our hackathon table.
It's horrible as soon as somebody says, "Do you have any questions?" Will?
Okay, I'm Simone. Yeah, look, I took a few notes, and obviously you have a clear vision of what you want to do, but I think would have been some documentaries about Kitchener, BBC, hasn't there? I was looking. There's been a BBC or some documentary.
Very short, sort of 15-minute.
As I was listening, what I was kind of wanting to hear more about was the actual story, because there's so much information here. You can't reproduce all of this information in a video. And it's about the audience and the story, the duration. All of this will be determined once you know the costs. So if it's a 20-minute film, you're looking at $200,000 pounds or something like that. So for me, I was wanting to know more about, I guess, because the camp existed for such a short period of time, and that you would have to prioritise, define the story that you want to tell. You cannot capture everything here. And for me, you probably just overload with ideas and information anyway, but some of the kind of things I thought was that, like the luggage store, the luggage is the trope of migration and journeys and movement. Then you would enter the camp, for example, a day in the life of certain refugees, for example, and then also the kind of have the refugee character-driven overview of their diversion experiences. But what I would definitely recommend is working with people who are experienced in design, because all of these ideas won't be able to be realised, because there is so much in there. I feel as though there's probably an issue about creative control and how you might realise this project, but I also think it really depends on the actual story. So Kitchener Camp, yeah, it's a really interesting story, but what was it about it? For me, it reminds me almost of post-war displaced persons camps in Europe. There's a similar duration, over a short period of time. They were somewhat contained. I don't know if these refugees were allowed any kind of mobility outside of the camp. Yeah, so it is. That's what reminds me of. So the cinema, which I'm writing about, cultural relief, recreation, the seasonality, the rehabilitation, or what would we do, the upskill. It's also a very gendered space. I didn't really, for me, there's something in there as well about all these men together in this space, right? What are they doing? just be besides having fun, recreation. So I think there's a lot of information there, and it's also on your website, but there's a VR and it's a story, like starting small. It's probably more realisable, and then to scale up into something larger. And even as you were talking, I was actually thinking probably like a documentary film, but a creative experimental documentary film with augmented reality. The archive, in a way, you don't kind of need to virtualise because you have so much historical information and so much of historical sources. So it's more augmented reality over the kind of camp spaces that recreating that and with your images. So I would also recommend that you go and watch a lot of VR and also a lot of augmented reality and documentaries to see what kind of design, visual language that you want to bring to it.
Yeah, I'll go to Kinga, but also just to echo what was coming out of our table very
Yeah,
quickly. Is what's the story, what's the narrative, and also this thing about coming away from VR, and we ended up actually with some web-based chat. So that's
I was actually thinking of something that Simone also touched upon, and maybe it's something about a story that is maybe not happening on the outside of the experience of these men. So when we think about the concept of masculinity at the time and the agony of being separated from your family, from your children, not knowing where they are, whether they're coming or not, that's maybe something that men didn't necessarily talk about in terms of their emotions. And the whole dimension of mental health, having something that's really kind of unsettling you, but that you maybe don't necessarily communicate with your peers, because of this idea of being a man and kind of trying to get things organized, get things done. On the other hand, this kind of escapism that you mentioned, that was also important and crucial to mental health. So my question is, you recreate the everyday life, you recreate the space maybe, and as Simone said, there's so much going on. But how do you want to address this thing that is there but isn't said? Yeah. I was really kind of, it was on my mind all the time when you were talking about this group of 4,000 mostly men. How do you navigate?
Well, through the materials really, because that's where that comes out. But if I'm talking about just kitchen to camp rather than the move to VR, then it's something that I generally do address in those talks. But I suppose for me, and I'm open to all sorts of suggestions at this stage. For me, I'm interested for these purposes in the geography of the camp and how it was experienced as a physical space. And I think other aspects of the refugee experience come out for me through that. So if you can move into a hut, whether it's 71 of the men, that lack of privacy, the claustrophobia of it, and so on. That I think being able to recreate something of that physical space actually will tell us quite a lot about their experiences as refugees for these months in 39.
Yeah, I think what I was also thinking is you've got so many good locations for also the inspirations, like the different kinds of soundscapes that you described come into play. And I think maybe because in the storyboard that you showed, there's a lot of movement, and I think that's the thing to be careful about with VR at the moment as it is, because quite a lot of people get motion sick when watching VR, especially movement. But what I think is also very interesting, at least that's what I just from inspiration of today, because I went and watched the VR films today, and I think something that's super interesting is just being stationary somewhere, getting the VR goggles on, and just seeing a space around you, so almost like a 360-degree picture, but that you can experience through VR.
Is that the East City films?
Yeah,
exactly. I have the same. Yes,
exactly, and I thought that was so amazing and so extraordinary to sort of sit in the middle and just really be surrounded. So if you, especially for a space where there's a lot of people in it, that might also be a thing to experience, to say like, it's not necessarily a VR scene or a VR film that moves through different spaces. We just have 3 settings after one another to give you like the spotlights of something. And I think that might be something that brings the cost way down than having a full-scale model of the entire space and of everything that you go through, because I think that might be quite expensive, or at least that's from whenever we have to design something in VR and AR, that's always a complicated thing if you actually have to design.
Well, who are you? Sorry, Josh.
I'm working for an organisation called Flux Guide, and we make apps and websites for museums or anything that's like knowledge transfer related, so tourism as well. And sometimes we do AR, mostly AR experiences, but sometimes also VR experiences. And that's also what I think might bring.
That is an interesting way of looking at it. And one of the things that came out of the hackathon was perhaps to almost do it the other way up from what I've been thinking, which is the same for me, where it starts with the opening of the gates, was actually, they were suggesting, starting from the perspective of a descendant, opening some kind of, whatever the kind of descendant's equivalent of the suitcase under the bed is, and encountering materials, and through the materials you go to a given space in the camp. So you're not, again, I think saying don't try and move through the camp, but experience, you know, if you open a document that refers to X place in the camp, to do it that way. So I guess there's going to be lots of ways of approaching this.
And especially if you put it in a museum space, for instance, you might not need someone to wear it for a long time, but it could be something like, I'm going to put this on, look around me, and then take it off again and move to the next space. So you might even have 2 or 3 VR headsets spread around wherever. Every single one just has a different space, because the VR headsets themselves, I don't think that that's where the actual cost comes in. They're quite like affordable these days, so that might also be something.
Thank you. This is great advice. Thanks so much. Just about to close, but some recommendations might be to the Grenfell Tower VR as well. That's a really powerful. And it's rebuilding of a space where you sit still, so you don't have to move in the VR, but the Grenfell Tower is rebuilt around you, and you hear testimony. It's very, because it's so recent as well. But just a recommendation. Okay, sorry we have to close, but I hope conversations can continue. So thanks.